So I picked up a couple of copies of Amazing Spider-Man number 32. One of them I got as a bundle, and I bought number 33. And the other one I just found a good deal on. So the idea was to buy a couple mid-grade copies, maybe use one as a reader, maybe get both graded, I'm not sure yet. It just depends on what grade comes back, and then obviously either sell these or hang them on the wall. I'm leaning towards selling them. I never really found this cover great. It's not really a key issue or anything like that. So I got limited space on my wall for comics. So what I've done is I've come up with a grading system for mid to low grade comics. Now, there's a deductive way of doing it where you deduct slowly over as you grade the comic for the higher grade comics. And I did a whole submission where I sent it to CGC, over 40 books. So I'll put a link to that above and in the description so you can check out that as well. Those books haven't come back yet as of the making of this video, and mainly the purpose of that is to try and calibrate and become a better grader of high grade books. Now, the next phase is I want to become better at grading mid to low grade books. So I came up with a points-based system that's kind of deductive, but it also basically takes some of the elements that CGC has said publicly that they use to grade comics. Like, they'll just look at a comic and they'll say, okay, this looks like a 3. Then they'll fudge it up and down based on various specific factors, and then they'll fudge it again based on minimums. Like, with this big of a stain, it cannot be higher than a 5.0 or something like that. So that's basically what I've done. I put a lot of work. I looked at a lot of comics online that had already been graded, and I kind of just visually looked at them and compared hundreds of comics to kind of come up with a system of grading these comics. And I came up with a points-based system that has basically 7 factors, and the bindery, corners, edges, spines, staples, and then the cover quality and the pages themselves. And, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 possible visual grades that can be given to these, just kind of subgrades that you look at. So anywhere from negligible damage all the way up to major damage. So I've got it listed here. Negligible damage is something that can really only be seen with magnification. Tiny damage is visible, but it's not that obvious. It really takes magnification to see it really well. Minor damage is obvious damage, but it doesn't really detract from the quality of the book. Moderate damage would be something really obvious, and it does detract from the presentation, but it isn't really a deal breaker a lot of the time for a comic. As far as, of course, it's going to keep it from getting the highest grades, but it may not necessarily make it an unattractive book. Extensive damage is something that is a little bit more than moderate, but it's not really major damage. Somewhere between. So what I found out is there was moderate than major, because CGC, when they're grading, they use words like this: negligible, tiny, minor, moderate, major. Well, it seemed like there was a big gap between moderate and major, so I kind of just added in extensive in between just to kind of fill a gap. So if it's not really major, it's not really moderate, I just kind of put it in between. So I also did a video explaining this and actually made it a Google Sheet that's clickable, so you can go through here, put a book down, go through each factor, give it a score, and then it should give you a relative grade that hopefully is pretty close to what it would actually grade at CGC. Now, I haven't actually done a submission using it yet. That's kind of the purpose of this video and the other videos I'm going to do in this series. So yeah, so what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and grade these 2 books. I'll go ahead and put them down here on the sheet. Got Amazing Spider-Man 32, and then, it's book 1, and then book 2 over here. And then we'll just go through here and we'll do the grading. So I'll go ahead and get these out of the holders here and we'll take a look. Okay, so here's the first book. So the first thing we look at is bindery. Now, from this day and age, Silver Age back in the 60s, it doesn't really factor in quite as much, but if there are bindery tears, we want to take note of that. So we can just take a look at the top. I'm using magnification. Because my eyes aren't so great. There's no kind of bindery tears or anything like that on this one, on either the top or bottom. So what we can do here is just leave it blank. Then we got the corners. So that's the next thing we look at. So this corner's torn completely off. So that would probably what I would call, you know, somewhere between moderate and extensive. So that's an extensive corner right there. But let's just look at the rest. If all the other ones are pristine, we might downgrade that. But yeah, we got a little chunk out of this one too. The spine actually is really nice at the top for this old of a book, but they are dinged. They're rounded a little bit. They're not perfect. So we'll just take a quick look at the back. As you see, there is a sun shadow on this book as well, and a little bit of stain here. So back corners appear to be much better. So I would call this more than, I mean, that corner there definitely detracts from the book, even though people looking at a 60s book might not be quite as upset by that as somebody looking at a modern book. But yeah, I would definitely call this extensive. So I'm going to go ahead and mark it on my sheet here as extensive on the corners. And then we'll look at the edges. That's the next factor that we look at. Got a little chunk out of the top. On the back, I can already see there. And you know, it's just kind of bent over a little bit. Some of this could be pressed out, of course. And, you know, it's got kind of the marble edges. You know, there's little chunks out of it here and there. But this one isn't that bad, actually. Not bad at all. And this bottom edge is actually really good. Kind of pristine. Relatively speaking, of course, at least. So there's a little chunk here. So that's going to get us down to at least moderate right there. There's a stain here on the edge. Now, stains I usually save for just the cover itself. So I'm not going to factor that in on this. This edge is really nice here along the side. This bottom has a little tear in it on the bottom. So overall, the chunk that's missing is on the back of the book. If that was the front, I might go more on the extensive side, but I think what we got here is probably just a moderate edge, and probably on the low end of moderate. But I think just going with moderate is the safe bet here. So we'll go moderate on the edge. And then we'll take a look at the spine. Now, being an older book like this, you can already tell this spine is not too bad. It's obviously got some color bricks in it. So I'm counting, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Obviously, 10 or 15 color breaking ticks here. And so we can just take a look here. It's not really rolled. It's like a slight, minute roll. So the actual indentations will press, and then you'll just end up with a color break. So we definitely know this. So we can just kind of just do some deduction here. Deductive reasoning. We know this is not a minor spine, but also it's not really extensive either, right? So it's a moderate spine. So that's what we're going to go with. So we can just use some common sense there. So let's take a look at the staples. That's the next thing. Staples look original. I don't see any kind of rust on them or even darkening. The staples are actually really nice on this book. Much nicer than most books of this age. I'm not really seeing any kind of lines coming off of them. So the staples on this book, there's a slight one here, but that might be more the spine. But this is actually a really nice, these are really nice staples here. I would say they're like negligible damage on them. Maybe we could call it tiny, just because there is a couple lines that come off of, but I think the lines on this one are not color breaking, they'll actually press out. So we can kind of keep that in mind. Actually, I put it in the wrong place here, so let me mark that off. Okay, so we got the cover. So let's just take a quick look. Now, it's got some creasing, slight little waviness to it. A lot of that can be pressed. There is a crease across right here, but let's just see if it breaks color. It does. So there's a color breaking crease right here. So we're already at least moderate here. So if I hold up the book, though, you can kind of see it there, but it's not super obvious. Overall, you can see the appeal of this book is pretty good. The presentation's really good. You can kind of see some color breaks. You can kind of see one up here as well. You can see that. And there is a sun shadow across the top on the front and the back. So, you know, I'm going to call this moderate, but leaning more toward the extensive side. So generally, I've kind of got a way, what I figure I do in that case is I mark it as moderate. But what I do is I also tick like minor, tiny, and negligible at the same time. And that'll take us just short of extensive, but, you know, still more than moderate. So that's a little trick that I've been using while I test this to kind of get to that point. Now, obviously, you could just add more levels in and be more nuanced with it, but we don't want to overcomplicate things, right? It's already complicated enough to grade books. But so what we'll look at here is, last thing is pages. So we just flip to the inside, see if there's anything obvious. The pages inside are really nice. They're, you know, you can see where the sun was up top, and there is a stain here. But I would say this is an off-white, overall off-white. I think if you took an Al card, this might be slightly off-white. So maybe this could be off-white cream up here, but not quite. I actually think this is white to off-white pages, but I think they would probably give it an overall grade of off-white. I don't think it's really going to hurt the grade that much. And I'm not seeing any tears or anything like that, but let's just go ahead and just glance through it just to make sure. Don't see anything missing. Yeah, the inside is really nice on this book. Yeah, that looks familiar there, does it not? Similar to the cover of 33. In fact, that may be the same spot. Okay, so we get to about the middle of the book here, and we do see one little tear here. Now this could be bindery, and I think it actually is bindery down here. So I'm going to go ahead and upgrade our bindery to more. I've actually got to add in some. I'm going to put, now this might not be something they even grade against, because if 100% of books generally have that, it really wouldn't count against. But I'm going to go ahead and go minor on bindery just to be safe, and add that to our list. Yeah, those are little bindery tears on the inside, but that's pretty common all the way through the 80s, even 90s. You'll see that type of thing. It's just whenever it's cut in the printer, it catches in that spot. But yeah, there's some little creasing going on, maybe a little bit on the inside. It's kind of, there's some bentness to the cover under the pages. So with that in mind, I probably would give this minor damage on the pages. So now that I have all that filled out, it's ready to go into the actual Google Sheet. So, but, you know, I'm not going to do that right now. I'll go down to the computer and we'll do a, you know, we'll continue on once we get both these books graded, and then we'll put these in the sheet and see what we come up with at that point. But before we do that, though, I'm just going to kind of, I think a good way to do this is use that, but also kind of use common sense and just look at this book and eyeball it and think, okay, based on my experience, what do I think this book is? And I have seen, this is definitely not worse than a 5. I would say this is definitely not worse than a 5. It's way too nice. I mean, you can see some 5s that have just extensive spine damage, tears, you know. The worst thing this book has going, it's probably going to limit it, I would think, is this corner up here with the sun shadow. So I'm thinking this book is probably going to be capped at a 6. So I'm thinking this is probably, I would land at a 5.5 on this book. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets a 6, but I would be surprised if it gets a 5. So I think 5.5 to 6 is what I'm going to put here as my guess. And then what we can do is when this comes back, we'll be like, okay, let's average it out. And then if I end up sending this to CGC, which I might very well do, I probably will. If nothing else, just do it as an experiment. I'm pretty sure I can recoup my money and even make a little money on this book for what I paid for it. It's almost nothing, right? So yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and grade the next book now. We'll get that one out. All right, so here's the second one. And first of all, what I can see on this one is, I think it actually presents better than the last one. Yeah, the spine on this thing is really nice, looking at it here. There is some minor little indentations and creases and spots, but I can tell this book has been well cared for. There's actually a pretty good one right here. You can see where it's like been bent over at some point with some color break. But yeah, I'm looking at this one. I think this is going to be even higher grade than the last one. So let's just go ahead and go through it. I mean, pretty simple process, right? We look at this for bindery stuff. And, you know, this is a rounded corner, but I don't really see anything bindery on it. Yeah, this corner has been taking a hit at some point, but it's not bindery, I don't think. So, yeah, so I'm going to put nothing on the bindery so far, but we'll take a look at the corners here. The corner is intact mostly. It's slightly rounded. So let's look at the rest. This one's the same thing. It's little pieces starting to come off there. Of course, this corner is banged pretty good. This one's rounded a little bit. Let's just take a look at the back. That one's a slightly rounded, and that one's slightly rounded. Okay, so overall I would say, so I'm going to call this more spine damage and edge damage. So we're kind of finding a mix of balance there, and there's a tear here on the edge. So I'm going to call this more of a minor, the corner's more minor than anything else. I don't think we can get to moderate. I think it might be on the high end of minor. So maybe we'll go minor and then also click tiny and negligible as well, just so we're a little bit above minor. Because the point differentiations, it doesn't really add that much to add. But I don't think we can go moderate on these corners. I think they're nice enough. And I mean, if you hold it up, I mean, those corners look good. So now we'll go to the edges. And we'll just look along the top here. That edge is really nice. This side is actually pretty exceptional for a Marvel book of the 60s. Now there's this tear on this edge right here, so that's going to detract. And a little ding right there, a little bent under edge there. On the back, it's a really nice top edge. There's a tear up here at the top. So based on all of that, if it wasn't for the two tears, I would say this is minor, but I'm going to call this, unfortunately, this is a great edge, but the good thing is, the tear doesn't really show up that well when you're looking at the book. It's down there, but the actual middle of the book presents really, really well. But I'm going to call this moderate on the edge, just because of those two tears. And now we'll look at the spine. And the spine might be one of the better spines I've seen in the 60s from a non-high grade book, you know. So we got just a few little spines. I can tell this book was probably owned by a collector. At least a collector picked this up pretty early on in the book. Unfortunately, it had this damage on the bottom probably when he bought it. Looks like it's been bent over. But overall, this spine so far down to here is pretty minor. Once we get to the bottom, I'm going to call this damage here more edge and cover. And I'm going to say the spine this is rare for a 60s book. At the price I paid for this one, so much under, because this was basically a free book. I paid for 33, and 32 just kind of came with it. And this is the one right here, and 33 was in pretty good shape too. So I'm going to go minor on the spine. I didn't expect that when I first was going to grade this book, but I'm pretty impressed by only being minor on that spine. And I don't think it's even close. I mean, I don't know if it shows up well on camera, but look how nice that is. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that spine right there. All right, so let's look at the staples. Staples original. Some slight little discoloration on that one, maybe. Let's open it up and look at the middle of the book here. See if we can get a look at the spine, or the staples in the middle, just to make sure there's no shenanigans here or anything. If I can find the middle. Should be around page 14 or 13, right? Yeah, here it is. It's actually page 11. 11 and 12. No, these staples look really good on the inside. There's no kind of discoloration. I mean, slightly, maybe not completely shiny anymore, but not like blackening or anything like that. So I'm going to go probably tiny on the staples here. And that might be a stretch. And then the cover itself. This is going to be the big detractor down here. This is automatically getting us to moderate. It's just a matter, is there more to go beyond moderate? And we have a sun shadow here on the bottom. That's not a huge deal breaker on a mid-grade book. I think you can get that all the way up to almost 9.0. And the top has it too, a little bit. So based on that, I think we got to go moderate just because of this. If it wasn't for this down here, man, it would be like minor. But it's definitely not extensive. You know, it can't be minor because of this. You know, it's hard to see probably, but there is a really good bend. Now, a lot of that will be cleaned up by a press, but it's pretty obvious right now. So that tear right there, you know, we kind of dealt with that a little bit on the edge, so we're not going to factor that in quite as much. So yeah, I'm kind of torn between going moderate or minor on this one. So I think what I'll do is, yeah, I think I'm just going to go moderate and just assume that that'll turn to probably minor once it's pressed. So we'll keep that in mind. There's some room for improvement on this book. But let's just err on the side of caution for right now. And I've kind of already looked at the pages a little bit, but let's go ahead and do it again. And this is similar to the last book, but probably even better. Let's see if it has the same bindery issues. Yeah, it does. I can see it right there. So I don't want to overdo it with this book. I try not to do more damage than is already here, but nothing's missing. I don't see any tears. Except for the bindery stuff. But on the bindery, I'm going to go ahead and knock that up to, I think I put minor on the last one. I think probably get away with tiny on that, and maybe it may not even count against it at all. So, you know, but once again, we err on the side of caution. I would rather grade something a 5 and it come back a 5.5 or 6 and just be surprised than not be conservative and then, you know, expecting a 6 and a 5 comes back or whatever. So we always err on expect the worst and just hope for the best kind of thing. Okay, so pages, I don't see anything. I mean, I would say off-white. Definitely off-white. But I would put maybe tiny on the pages. These pages are nice. This is definitely, certainly, I mean, look at that. You could probably make an argument for almost white. Maybe off-white, white to off-white. But I'm going to stick with the off-white and just go tiny on it. So this is definitely a higher grade book than the last one. We thought the last one was somewhere between a 5.0 and a 6. So I would think 6 would be the worst you would get on this book. But this terror is going to kind of keep us out of the 8s, obviously. So I don't think 8 is possible in this book. I think 6 is the basement on this book. It just depends on how harshly somebody was to grade this corner right here. But I don't think this corner is going to take you more than a couple points down. So I think this book looks like a solid 6.5, maybe before press. Somewhere between maybe 7 after. So I'm going to put 6.5 to 7 on this book. I think a press would probably solidify this at a 7. And we might have an outside chance at a 7.5 on this book, which is really, really cool. So let's go 6.5 to 7.0. And that's my guess on it. And we'll see what comes back when we enter this into the computer there. And so I'm just going to pause the video and we'll come back and we'll switch to screen here and take a look. Okay, so here we go. We got these two books. We just went through the process upstairs, and now we have our data that we entered on the sheet right here. So if you look up here at the top of your screen, you'll see on this Google Sheet here, I created this tool, the point-based tool that we talked about. Now you can get a copy of this. I give it away for free. It's actually in the first 1.0 version or whatever. So take that with a grain of salt. So use it with a grain of salt. It's just a tool. It's just something to assist you. Obviously, when I get a lot of these books back, I can kind of recalibrate it and things like that. So keep that in mind. It's probably not going to be perfect, but it certainly is like a good relative tool, I think, to use to get you in the ballpark. And that's the whole point of this, right? So let's go ahead and just enter from book 1 here. So we had, let's just use the green one over here. So we had minor on bindery, extensive on corners, moderate on edges, and moderate on spine. Staples were tiny. They had good staples. Cover, we were a little bit over moderate, so what we did is we went ahead and just did this, just to kind of like somewhere between moderate and extensive there. We can do it that way. And then of course on the pages, we just put minor. Pages weren't really that bad, so we could have went minor or probably tiny, but minor, we'll just err on the side of caution here. And that puts us at a 5.5. Well, what I put on my sheet here, if we can get it up here, is 5.5 to 6.0. So, I mean, we're right in line with what we were expecting. So what I can expect on this book is probably, you know, we had a couple things that maybe were pressable. Like the cover, there are some pressable defects. We could probably get that down to just moderate. Minor might be a little bit challenging, but maybe somewhere between minor and moderate. Staples are still good. There was a little bit of bending on the edges, but mostly it was the chips out of the edge, so we're not going to downgrade that. But the spine could certainly be improved to somewhere between minor and moderate, I think. So maybe something like this. And nothing we can do about the bindery. Now that could be something that's not even a factor, right? Because that's something that's originally done in the printer and probably almost on 100% of books printed back then. So sometimes they don't even take off for that. So we'll just give it a best case scenario type of thing here. Corners, probably nothing we can do there. So if we did talk about the pages as being here, I don't think we're going to ever get to 7 on this book. I think we discussed that. I think the absolute cap on this book is 6.5. But I'm guessing after press, it's a solid 6. I wouldn't be disappointed with 5.5. I'd be happy with 6.5, but somewhere around 6. And I'm pretty sure that's where I'm going to stay on that one. And we'll just, yeah, we'll see what happens on that one. So book number 2. We'll do that one now. And that's, we'll use the yellow side over here, or orange, or whatever the color that is. And this is a much nicer book. Well, not much nicer, but it is definitely nicer, a nicer book. So we got minor on the bindery again. And corners, we were somewhere between minor and moderate. So we did this here. And edges, we were moderate. Spine, minor on this one. It had a very nice spine. That's one of the better spines you'll see from that era. Staples, tiny. Not really much there. Staples actually on the first book were slightly better, I think, than this one, but still not much there. Cover, we had moderate. And pages, we had tiny. And that takes us to a 7.0. Well, our expectation on this book, we had put, see if we can get it to focus here, 6.5 to 7. So we're right in that same range, 6.5 to 7. Now this is a really nice book. Would not be amazed if it got a 7. Now let's think about if we were to press this book. I think we had some room for getting a little bit better on the cover. I don't know if we could ever just be minor, so probably like somewhere between minor and moderate. And maybe the bindery doesn't count anymore or matter. And the pages were nice, probably nothing we can do. I mean, we're probably never going to get, I mean, it's got some yellowing. It's not perfect, you know. It's not like pristine white. Of course, you know, you can have off-white pages up to a very high grade, even cream up to a very high grade. So that's not really a huge factor, but it is a contributing factor to the overall appeal of the book. So we're just going to leave that at tiny. But other than that, I don't really see much room for improvement. I don't think we're ever going to get above an 8 on this book. I think 8 might be the extreme max on this book. I could see it getting an 8. The only thing is that bottoms of the spine that's been over, how well that cleans up after press, and whether we can have a tear. So what we can do here is we can kind of look down here. I have a comic defect maximum sheet. So this is very valuable. So what I've done is I've scoured the internet. I've found the maximum defect you can have for every potential grade. So for example, with staining, if you have even the slightest amount of staining, the maximum grade you can ever get is a 9.0. If you have 2/4 size staining, 7.0 is the max you can get. If 1/4 of the front cover or back cover have staining, a 5.0 is the maximum you get. So that's just an example. And the same thing works for tears, creases, pieces missing, foxing, the staples, the paper color, all of that stuff. So we'll just think about the tears on this second book. There was that small, probably between 1/4 and 1/2 inch tear. So let's just go ahead and look at tears here. So at max, it was a 1/2 inch tear. So what we've got here is an 8.5. You can have a maximum of 8.5 with a 1/2 inch tear. So we definitely could still get an 8.0 with that tear, and that's good to know. Was there anything else in this book? Did it have any pieces missing? Well, if you remember the first book, it had that slight piece of the corner missing. And it had another little piece out of the edge. A 1/4 penny you can get up to a 7. So I'm guessing that's probably about right. It wasn't much more. It's not going to be 1/2 a penny size for all of that cumulative. If it was, it would be a max 5.0 book. So if they were to grade that harshly, I could see them going down to a 5.0 on that book. So I would not be amazed if that just happens to come back and that's just it. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. But I think the way they rate corners is a little bit different than pieces missing from like edges and inside pages and things like that. So with that being said, on the second book, I think our cap is 8.0, and I think our max on the first book is 6.5. So we'll give this book after press a range of somewhere between 7 and 8 for the second book, and somewhere between 6 and 6.5, maybe a little narrower range on the first book. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. It took me a long time to make this tool. A lot of looking at books online and just basically going through and finding ones that have been graded and then making this giant list and then kind of hiding the grades on all the books. And then I would go through each one and evaluate using this tool. And then I would uncover the grades and I would see a comparison. And the last batch I did, I was no further than 1.0 grade from anything. And most of them were either spot on or 0.5 from. So if this thing says it's a 6.5, there's a very good chance it's either between a 6 or a 7. If it says it's an 8, it's somewhere between a 7.5 and an 8.5. etc. If it says it's a 9.2, it's probably somewhere between a 9.0 and a 9.4. And I think in the last 20 comics that I tested with this thing, there was not even one comic that was more than that 1.0 grade or that one level either way. So that's how I arrived at version 1.0 of this tool. I hope it's helpful for you. If you use it, let me know how it goes for you. If you use this to send a batch of comics off, please write down your data and let me know what your preliminary was, and then whether it was pressed or not, and then afterwards what it came back as. I would love to hear and gather some more data on this so we can improve this, because once I get 40, 50, 60 books back using this, I'm going to revamp it and recalibrate it again, and we'll go from there. So yeah, I appreciate you watching. So I've got a few more Silver Age books to do. The other videos won't be as extensive as this one, but I'll go through the same process. I'll grade the book, I'll fill out the sheet, we'll come back, we'll look at it on here, and then we'll come up with our final evaluation before we submit it to CGC, and for press and then for CGC. So thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.